4,000 years ago, on a remote and windswept island far north of Siberia, the very last woolly mammoths on Earth made their final stand. A small, lonely herd grazed across the cold tundra of Wrangel Island as the Ice Age world around them continued to vanish. At the same time, scientists deep in the Siberian permafrost were unearthing massive carcasses that had been frozen in time for thousands of years. These were the final giants of their kind. Towering, shaggy beasts with long, curving tusks moved slowly across a vast, open landscape. The landscape was dotted with retreating glaciers and hardy vegetation. For centuries, we believed these animals were simply a cold-adapted version of the elephants we know today. But the DNA preserved inside these last survivors would change everything. The genetic story locked in their remains would rewrite the evolutionary history of the entire elephant family. It would reveal how isolated populations of megafauna slowly unraveled at the very end. For over a century, woolly mammoths were taught as simply the furry, cold-adapted versions of modern elephants. Scientists classified them as close evolutionary cousins of the Asian elephant. They were seen as the ultimate herbivorous giants of the Ice Age. With their thick coats, small ears, and massive curved tusks, mammoths appeared to be nothing more than elephants that had successfully adapted to the extreme cold. Textbooks and museum exhibits presented them as part of the same evolutionary line as living elephants, only modified for Pleistocene conditions. This interpretation seemed completely logical. Their overall body plan, trunks, and feeding behavior closely mirrored those of Asian elephants. Everything fit neatly into our understanding. For generations of paleontologists, this remained the standard view. Woolly mammoths were the majestic, hairy elephants of the north. This model persisted for very good reasons. First, the morphological evidence was extremely compelling. Skeletons showed striking similarities to modern elephants in tusk structure, skull shape, trunk anatomy, and body proportions. These similarities led experts to conclude they were relatively recent offshoots of the same lineage. Second, recovering usable ancient DNA from Pleistocene remains proved incredibly difficult for decades. Most mammoth fossils came from sites where genetic material had degraded badly. It was only with major breakthroughs in permafrost preservation technology that scientists could begin extracting high-quality genomes. Until then, paleogeneticists had little choice but to rely heavily on physical bones. Third, the ecological picture reinforced the assumption. Animals that lived in similar ways and occupied comparable niches were naturally assumed to be closely related. This logical chain of reasoning was supported by every new fossil discovery. The model was clean, elegant, and consistent. It was published widely and taught confidently in universities around the world for more than 100 years. Nobody seriously questioned whether the very last mammoths might carry a far more ancient and surprising genetic story. The key to unlocking this genetic story lay in one of nature's most remarkable accidents. While most remains decayed, a handful of late surviving carcasses were preserved in the vast permafrost of Siberia and the frozen ground of Wrangel Island. These locations created perfect natural deep-freeze chambers. Constant sub-zero temperatures prevented bacterial decay. Low oxygen and stable conditions dramatically slowed DNA degradation. In contrast, warmer sites had their genetic material destroyed. The permafrost essentially acted as time capsules, protecting fragile DNA inside teeth, bones, and even soft tissue for thousands of years. This rare geological luck gave scientists the material they needed to read the genomes of the very last mammoths on Earth. The breakthrough came in two major waves. An important 2017 study first revealed troubling signs of genetic decline. Then in 2024, Marianne Dehaske, Love Delaine and their team published a landmark paper in the journal Cell. They successfully sequenced 21 high-coverage woolly mammoth genomes spanning more than 50,000 years. 14 of these came from the last isolated population on Wrangel Island. Most thought it nearly impossible to recover such data. Using advanced laboratory techniques on permafrost-preserved bones and teeth, the researchers produced some of the best ancient genomes ever obtained. For the first time, scientists could track in stunning detail how the genetic health of mammoth populations changed right up until their final extinction. The results were explosive. The last mammoths on Earth represent a deeply divergent chapter in proboscidean history. Although woolly mammoths split from Asian elephants roughly 5.7 million years ago, the Wrangell population had become genetically unique. After 6,000 years of total isolation, they suffered extreme inbreeding and massive loss of genetic diversity. Harmful mutations accumulated rapidly, altering large stretches of functional DNA in ways that make them unlike any living elephant. This final group had effectively become a ghost lineage of herbivores, evolving in complete isolation with no gene flow from mainland populations. Their genomes carried a heavy load of deleterious changes affecting fertility, immunity, and overall fitness. The very last mammoths were no longer simply furry elephants. They had turned into something genetically distinct, the end product of thousands of years of isolation that left a signature no modern elephant shares. Three things make this discovery impossible to dismiss. First, the extreme genetic distance between the Wrangell mammoths and living elephants. Even the very last genomes remained consistent with earlier mammoth populations, showing a deeply rooted lineage that persisted through massive shifts. Second, the complete lack of gene flow with any mainland elephant lineage. After becoming trapped roughly 6,000 years ago, no fresh DNA entered. No fresh DNA entered from outside for thousands of generations, creating total reproductive isolation. Third, this stands as a textbook case of genetic erosion through extreme isolation. The mammoths only superficially resembled living elephants because they faced the same pressures, but their functional DNA had accumulated mutations. These changes affected immunity, reproduction, and overall fitness in ways no modern elephant genome carries. Together, these prove the final mammoths had become genetically distinct, the last survivors of a once vast branch that evolved in isolation. The mammoth discovery is not an isolated case. It is part of a wider pattern now emerging across Ice Age herbivores. Ancient DNA is revealing similar hidden lineages in other giant proboscideans. Columbian mammoths actually show complex admixture patterns. Straight-tusked elephants that roamed Europe carried genomes closer to African elephants than to Asian ones or mammoths. Even earlier proboscidean lineages revealed by million-year-old DNA demonstrate multiple ancient branches that diverged millions of years ago. Entire lineages evolved specialized adaptations, ruled vast ecosystems for hundreds of thousands of years, and ultimately vanished without passing their genes. These revelations are dramatically changing how we understand the lost world of Ice Age plant eaters. The debate around these findings is real, and I want to be honest about the tensions. Some note that early studies relied on limited samples. Newer data has tempered earlier ideas of rapid genomic meltdown, showing the population remained stable longer than thought before a final collapse. There are still active arguments about how much weight we should give to traditional skeletal morphology compared to genetic evidence. Questions remain about whether any faint traces survive in modern elephants or in ongoing de-extinction projects. While that possibility cannot be ruled out, the overwhelming genomic data points to complete isolation and replacement. These mammoths were not fleeting experiments. They were dominant herbivores that ruled Pleistocene ecosystems for over 250,000 years. They shaped entire landscapes with their grazing and adapted to some of the harshest conditions ever faced by giant plant eaters. Then they vanished in one of the most remote Arctic outposts in what feels like a geological instant. Their story highlights the extreme fragility of highly specialized megafauna when ecosystems shift. The giants had nowhere left to go. Scientists are actively searching for more ancient DNA, hoping to fill in the missing chapters. And that is the most important part of this story. Not just the answers we have uncovered, but the vast scale of what we still have not yet asked about these extraordinary mammoths and their vanished world.